Okay. Um, yeah, so this will be recorded and will be on the Social Design Sydney YouTube channel. There's heaps and heaps of videos, like pretty much every single event ever since 2013 is on the YouTube channel, except for one when we had some video issue. So there's lots of practitioners who've been sharing lots of different things. Kieran's on the call. We've got a video from Kieran, Emma as well. There's a video from Emma from quite some time ago talking about co-design. So I do encourage you to go and have a look at the YouTube channel, and I'll share the links later. Hand over to Claire. So a lot of you I know are familiar with Claire. She's pretty epic. She does a whole lot of cool stuff. So I'm pretty excited to have her here today. So she's currently working at Taxi, working on being the lead of the National Futures Initiative. She's also an artist, an academic, and an activist. She's passionate about just futures, and her PhD research has looked at how we might encourage communities to imagine and enact regenerative futures. And she did this through the award-winning Participatory Futures Project, Museum of Futures, and she does keynotes and workshops in futures thinking for organisations and universities, and is often commissioned to write future histories for organisations, laying out stories of societal transformation. So the way that we're going to roll today is, if you have questions along the way, as Claire's sharing, please pop them in the chat. And what I'm going to do is collate that list and share it back to Claire, and she will try and cover as many questions as she can in one kind of narrative at the end. So that's how we're going to roll today. So I'd like to hand over to Claire, and thank you all for coming and showing up. It's great to have, live questions and bodies, in the Zoom room. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. So nice to be here. So many familiar faces. It's so nice to see you, Layla and Beck and Taz, and oh my God, it's really cool. All right, I am going to just quickly share my screen. All right, now, so I want to do a bit of an acknowledgement, both of country and just of me, where I am. So my partner's Israeli. We are a Jewish family. We celebrate Hanukkah. We do kind of Christmas light, but Hanukkah is a big celebration for us. So I have to admit, I am coming to you a little rattled, but yesterday, speaking about nervous system regulation, yesterday I took myself and my kids out to the promised land, this is a picture of, which is just outside of Bellingen, if you know the area. And we spent the day in the most beautiful nature around. And this is all on Gumbaynggirr country. We live in such a strong community, and I feel such a connection to this nature. I also get to do Gumbaynggirr language and cultural classes here for free in my local hood, which is so amazing. So I want to acknowledge beautiful Gumbaynggirr country and how much it, saves me and, helps me in my life. Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, I'm working for the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, as Jack said. If you want to contact me, you can get my email from Jack's, or LinkedIn is really good. And today I'm going to talk to you about how stories shape futures, which is kind of if I was going to sum up my whole last 8-10 years in futures, it would be this statement that stories shape futures. So my research question was, how might we encourage communities to imagine and enact regenerative futures? I'm probably certain that in this group of people, I probably don't need to explain what regenerative futures mean. But in case anyone wants a reminder, really regenerative futures are where we're going beyond sustainable. We're going beyond doing no harm, and we're going, how do we actively heal? And this on multiple levels. It's not just on climate, it's also on equity and on how we are together. Mine was a creative practice research done through Museum of Futures. It was quite a crazy PhD in that it features lots of art and artworks. It features stories. I present my method using origami. I also presented a ritual. And to be fair, it hasn't been marked by examiners yet. So it has all been submitted, but I could, it's under examination. So they could come back with lots of critique. But hopefully not. But if you're interested in what I have to say, I just thought I'd add, I have a Substack newsletter where I'm sharing like little snippets of my research every week on a Friday. So yeah, if you want to join that, it's called How Stories Shape Futures, or but yeah, because lots of people said they would read my PhD, but it's 500 pages, so I presume no one's going to do that. So, just to explain a little bit about Museum of Futures before I get into chatting to you guys, because otherwise it can be a little bit like, what? What is Museum of Futures? And maybe it's best to read you one of our signs at our last exhibition, which was, "Welcome to the Museum of Futures and its paradox. We see a museum as a window to the past, a building where tangible artifacts are collected or stolen to present the intangible stories of life to you, the public. But this museum aims to break those assumptions. Artworks or artifacts, historical narratives or imaginaries, visitor, co-creator or curator, present, past, future, or everywhen. This exhibition is always being created, is always changing, and is always evolving, as are we." And really, the idea of Museum of Futures was to kind of play with the idea of a museum, and that instead of it being these kind of objects that hold us to stories of the past, it's a nursery of ideas. It's a place for us to have important conversations and, to have different kinds of thoughts. Just to give you a brief overview, I've done quite a few of these exhibitions now. Started with the City of Sydney in 2019, did an exhibition around the future of work where we had 10 exhibits, 5 presenting a kind of positive future and 5 presenting a sort of negative future when it came to taking climate action. And it was during this process where I worked with the City of Sydney to create these artworks and these stories that I realized that maybe there was a beauty in getting people involved in the process of creating these futures. So after the first exhibition, in the second exhibition, Pandemic Pivots, I worked with my colleague Mel Rumble, and we went to 10 different communities around Sydney, and we asked them what kind of futures would be the futures that people wanted, that the pandemic could provide a pivot point to. So all of the artworks in that came from community participants, and then all their ideas were taken by artists. Most of the time, artists were actually from those communities or had a relationship with those communities, and then turned into these beautiful works of art and this futures narrative that again came from their ideas. I also had an exhibition in the US called Food for Thought. This was around the ownership of food systems, and really questioned whether we think the difference between the futures that we want and the futures that we think we're going to get. So in this exhibition, every artwork, there was 1 exhibit and 2 future narratives. And I asked participants to vote on which future was preferable and which future was probable. And it was very interesting. I can give you the results here, which is capitalist futures overall are deemed to be more probable. Regenerative futures are deemed to be more preferable. So, that's the high level stuff. And then we were really fortunate that in 2023, we got to have kind of almost a bit of a retrospective exhibition at New South Wales Parliament with bits of all of the exhibits. I just wanted to show you this. So this was a really beautiful new piece that, thanks to a grant from the Australia Council for the Arts, now Create New South Wales, we were able to work with 2 First Nations artists, Nicole Smead and Michael Robinson, to create this work, which has got a artifact carved into the center, which is kind of represents this idea of everywhen, that time doesn't just move forward, but actually kind of circles around on itself. And each of the plaques are a speculative date in Australia's future. And fun fact, out of all of the ones that we put in there, including universal basic income and, all sorts of kind of, donut economics, the one that Parliament kind of almost censored was, I think it was in 2027 or something, the whole Parliament apologises to Julia Gillard for their misogyny. And yeah, they did let us have it in, which was excellent. There was a question for a moment. But also this exhibition, I think probably my most proud moment in a funny way was when Mark Latham stole some of the exhibits and took them into the chamber to make fun of them with other colleagues. Thankfully, Parliament, there's police everywhere, so they got returned pretty quickly. But it allowed us to sort of have this bigger conversation out in the media, and to kind of highlight the reason why despite this, we were not going to cover our objects because our First Nations curator was like, no, they will be there. They need to breathe. They need to be open to the public. And it was, it's kind of nice to have that. Now, I thought I would give you guys a choice today. So I've done this presentation a few times, but I've only really presented the method that I kind of came up with, which I totally do, and I might be able to cover really quickly. But I also wondered whether in this group you guys might like to play around with a ritual. So, what do you think? Do you want to tell me in the chat what you what you would like? Because I can cover it, or I can kind of ritual. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, okay. All right. I don't have a huge amount of time, so what I will do is I will do the ritual, but I'll like super cover the method. And then if anyone is keen to dive into the method more or would like to use it, just let me know and I can send you stuff and we can chat about it. Okay, excellent. All right, so we're going to start. This is sort of starting with my method, but we'll get to the ritual in a second. So, my main major contribution to knowledge was narrative futures practice, and this really is kind of the joining of narrative practice or narrative therapy, if anyone is familiar with it, with kind of futures thinking, with sort of community work. And because I wanted this method to be able to be used by any kind of community leader or organizer or anything, instead of coming up with a strict sort of workshop, I just came up with 4 analogies that kind of help you understand how we think about futures and the little tricks around how we think about futures. But before I go into it in more detail, I just wanted to present this bit, which is in narrative practice, we're asking lots of questions and there's sort of some ideas on how we can ask good questions. So I just want to cover this in a bit of an overview. So the biggest thing for me is that hopefully I might have a doctorate soon in this stuff, which will be very, very exciting. But when I go into a community workshop on futures, I am not the expert at all. And I really want to make sure that I try to make that really clear, because while I might have spent a lot of time thinking about futures, what we're after is the futures of this community, and I know nothing about it. So when I'm asking questions, I'm asking as the new person, and I'm encouraging people to feel ownership and their own expertise in this kind of matter. I also would always rather ask more questions than assume that I have knowledge or that I understand something. I want to ask questions and I want to encourage other people to ask questions that generates and honors people's knowledge and understanding of the community and the desires of the communities. But I also want to ask questions that support personal agency, because really this was a huge big crux of my research, was this how much agency do we feel in shaping futures. So this is just a few of the guidelines around how we ask questions. Okay, so the first analogy is the telescope. So when we think about futures, we actually engage in something called episodic futures thinking. So this is sort of the part of our brain that's associated with memories, but also creativity. And this to me is like when we step outside at night and we look up at the night sky. There's just like trillions and trillions of stars, and some of them are bright and some of them are a little bit less bright, but there's just more than we could ever imagine that ever count. And this is like when we're doing creative episodic futures thinking. However, when we're thinking about futures and we want to take action on those futures, we undergo this different process that's called mental contrasting. And this is where we take what we know about the world And I'm going to argue in this case that a lot of what we know about the world, or what we know about the world, comes from dominant narratives, that comes from stories or experiences that we've had that we've kind of hooked up together in our mind to explain the world to us. So it's like we're kind of looking through these stories at the sky now. So it's like we're looking through a telescope where the lenses inside are these dominant narratives. And now some of the stars that we can see and some of the stars that we can't see. So I always encourage people in the workshop to do creative episodic future thinking. So imagine beautiful futures. But then we go through this process where we start to think, hang on, are any of the lenses that, or any dominant narratives that we bring to our understanding of the world, influencing this future? Now, one of the other things that I looked at in my research was, what are these stories? What are these dominant narratives that really shape how we imagine the future? And this came from research that I did in the creation of that Pandemic Pivots exhibition. I got lots of information from people. And one of the things that I kind of discovered was that people could imagine these really beautiful and amazing regenerative futures. But when I asked them whether they thought they were probable, they kept coming up with these answers like, oh, it would be amazing, but people are greedy, or there's too much corporate greed, or there's too much money in politics, or I don't think anyone ever said like there's private ownership of the means of production, but we were getting pretty close to saying that. So in my research, I suddenly took this turn and kind of went, okay, well, let's look at what connects all of these things together. For me, that I could put a name of it, which was capitalism. And that if we look at what sustains capitalism, we find these sort of 5 stories. And there's probably more, but these are the 5 that I've kind of taken, which are control or colonization. I tend to fluctuate between using which word there, because colonization can have really much bigger, broader parameters. What I'm kind of looking at here is the belief that we can control and own living things and that we have the right to do that. Commodification, which is the value of something is determined by how much someone is willing to pay for it. Competition, which stems from the free labour market, that our value is determined by how we compare with others. Concentration, that it is natural for power to be concentrated in the hands of the few. And continual growth, more is better, which is obviously the kind of defining principle of capitalism, is, to create more. So what I did in my research was I sort of looked at, okay, if those were the extractive stories, what are the regenerative stories? And really for me, there's sort of this flip side, because we don't just live in one economic system, right? We live in capitalism, but we also live in different economic systems. And there's many activities that we partake in every day in our home lives and potentially in our work lives that aren't capitalist in nature. So, I sort of theorize that, it's not always continual growth. Sometimes it's care that we're putting our attention in, that often we don't see everyone as commodities, but as complex members of a vastly interconnected ecosystem. We don't see concentration as natural or economies of scale as an argument for things being in the hands of the few, but we can see the value of decentralized governance. We see that we don't need to be in collaboration with each other, we don't need to be in competition with each other, but rather collaboration is how we get the best out of everyone, and that we don't have this need to control. Instead, we can kind of coexist. So in this end, I created a ritual that we could do to remind us about these different stories when we come in from a world where we've been dealing with capitalism, and now how do we ground ourselves in a world where that's not the case? And ritual is really important, and I would argue that in Australia, whenever I do international talks and I do an acknowledgement of country, international people are like, oh, this is so great. And I think it is this ritual that is really beautiful, in that it has forced us to sort of focus on where we are and where we stand and the communities that we are part of. And I think paying our respects is this very important engine of cultural change. My ritual is nothing like that, but it just sort of to land that rituals are really important. So I want you to imagine now that you're in a Museum of Futures exhibition, and in front of you there is a display, and on it there is a leaf, a rock, a seed, some water, and some soil. And this is what the didactic card alongside reads. Okay. The 5 objects before you are from a set of learning tools developed in 2027 that were used in schools and community gatherings to promote a different way of seeing our relationships to the world. In 2026, as the global recession hit hard, the call for reining in unfettered capitalism grew louder. With governments still entangled in capitalist ideology and focused on recovering their falling GDP, a group of community leaders got together to try and enact change on local levels. However, instead of introducing written texts or a set of guidelines, they took their cue from a 100-year-old story of the Iron Ring. Does anyone know this story of the Iron Ring? No? Oh, okay. Exciting. I saw at least a few heads. Okay. So the Iron Ring is a Canadian story. So in 1900, construction began on the Quebec Bridge. As construction was nearing completion, the bridge collapsed and 75 people were killed. So an inquiry was launched that showed that doubts had been raised by some of the younger engineers on the viability of this bridge. However, they were disregarded and ignored, and construction resumed. Now, yet again, engineers expressed their concerns, and again they were ignored. And when the bridge collapsed for the second time, the Canadian engineering industry was forced to do some deep soul searching. How did this happen? Why were the engineers ignored? And the reason was a culture ruled by cut costs and not by responsibility, the creed of capitalism leading to profits being put before people. So in an interesting deviation from the norm, they decided that they needed to change the culture. So in 1922, they introduced a ritual for all graduating engineers in Canada. In the ritual, every student recites a poem by Rudyard Kipling and was given an iron ring to wear on the pinky finger of their dominant hand. The idea is this ring is designed to clink on the table when they sign the contract, reminding them of their oath. The change makers in 2026 saw the power of ritual to remind us of our relationships to the world as well as our obligations. They introduced the idea of a practice that could be done at the start of any gathering where decisions were being made. They didn't wish to introduce an object that would need to be purchased like the ring, so they relied on items that could be found in the natural world: water, soil, leaves, seeds, and rocks. Leaders were provided with the text to explain the use of each object, but also encouraged to make the explanation their own. So the objects before you have been gathered recently, but the text has been sourced from the original writings of the group, and you are encouraged to read the text and handle each object before combining them in the regeneration ritual at the end. Okay, now it was a bit of late notice, so I I didn't give you guys the opportunity to do this with me, but we can do this together if you kind of like. So the first part of the regeneration ritual is leaf. I have a little leaf here for us. And really, the thinking behind this is this shift from needing to control to coexistence. And my inspiration was really something that Tyson Yunkaporta Porter wrote about who own you. And, you know, he was explaining to me, we did this interview a few years ago, that like in his culture, someone would say, who own you? Which doesn't mean what do you own, but who do you belong to? Who are you connected to? And I really love this idea. So here we see this leaf, and it reminds us that we do not need to colonize or control because we can simply coexist. The leaves and the tree and plants around us convert carbon dioxide and air into oxygen. Our bodies take in this oxygen and convert it to carbon dioxide. And in this way, what we breathe is a byproduct of the leaves, and they breathe in our air. It's this mutually beneficial relationship that has been in existence for as long as we have. So take your leaf, hold it in your hands. This leaf has in some way helped you breathe, it has kept you alive, and you have kept it. Let go of any desire for ownership and control, and instead breathe in the respect and reciprocity that this leaf reminds us of. Okay, so my next one is a rock. So here we go. And really, so the ritual here is, this is a rock, and the youngest possible rock in Australia, it would be 4,000 years old, and it would have been around in the Neolithic times and seen the appearance of farming. And if this rock was one of the oldest possible in Australia, probably not because that's normally in WA, it could be up to 2.7 billion years old, and it would have been around in a time when there was no oxygen in the atmosphere, when there were no trees and, of course, no humans. So whatever its age, it has seen more of the world than we can possibly imagine. Yet if we were to value it through the lens of capitalism, we might consider it worthless. So take this rock, hold it in your hands, and let it remind you that nothing in this world can be simply valued by what someone wants to pay for it. Instead, everything's value is complex and interwoven with history. Okay, our next one is seed. Now, I brought two seeds to show you. I have some little mung bean seeds, which are actually my second generation seeds. If anyone ever really wants to plant anything like mung beans that you just get from the bulk shop, they're super great for helping the fertility of the soil. And look at this other wild seed. This is a big rainforest seed. But a seed is a genetic material of the plant and is the most precious thing it produces, the potential of life. And each seed is different, yet each has evolved to collaborate with everything around it. If you hold a dandelion seed, its wings collaborate with the wind to blow it to new land. If your seed comes from fruit, this is a collaboration with you and your gut to create something tasty that you will eat and then discard. So take this seed, hold it in your hand, and let it remind you that life is not a competition, but an adventure. And instead of seeing those around you as competitors, may you be like the seed and see how you can work together with others as we all journey into the unknown. Okay, next one is water. I have some water here. So the gift of life. We are half water. Our planet is more than half water. And what I love about water is that it never concentrates in one area. It reminds us that life is constantly moving and transforming and circulating. So if we look at our water and we watch how it moves, we can be reminded that we should not hoard what we have, but let the abundance flow between us. And instead of wanting to concentrate power in our own hands, maybe we can share because there's unity in our diversity. Okay, and our last one is soil. And so I have a little bit of soil in here. So soil, the most beautiful paradox on earth, that which dies transforms into that which sustains life. Even our bodies will transform, becoming edible by the billions of microbes in the soil. So let's take this soil as a reminder that we will all end up as soil, that our death will give life. And instead of valuing ourselves for how we contribute to capitalism by being productive, let's be content with valuing ourselves for being a part of this amazing cycle of life. Oh, okay. And then lastly, in this ritual, I'm sorry, I should have given you guys, it would have been so nice to do it together, but we get to put it all together. So here's my soil, and I'm going to add my leaf to the soil and my seeds. I'm going to use my little mung beans underneath. And then, and see whether this grows, I'm going to put a rock on the side just to keep it down and my water in the top. Anyway, we will see. Maybe that'll grow and I can show you guys next time. Okay. All right. Oh, you just came. I don't know. So we've got a little bit of time. We've got like 9 minutes. So I'm going to rush through the last bits of this. Okay. So the constellation is my second analogy. And really in the constellation, we're looking at how our brain makes stories. So this time we're looking up to the night sky and we're looking at those stars, but we're viewing them through a different lens. So these stars are now all of the experiences that we've had in life, whether it be something that's happened to us or something that we've learned from something or something that someone said. Now, our brain, in order to make sense of those, connects kind of some events together and makes a bit of a story. Like, can be, I've had a car accident and someone once said something bad about my driving. And so I've got this story that I'm a bad driver. But what's important for us to realize is that outside of this constellation are all these other stars. So there are always these events that sit outside of that dominant narrative. So when I'm doing a workshop and, people will say, oh, well, that future would be so beautiful, but that's not possible because humans are greedy. So then it gives us an opportunity to say, okay, but are all humans greedy, or are some humans greedy, or are we greedy in different contexts? And it kind of allows us to pull apart the validity of that dominant narrative and allow for some other stories to kind of come through. Oh yeah, sorry, this is me explaining that. Okay. So I've got these slides in here. These are some futures techniques that connect to these analogies, but I don't want to go through it because I don't have a lot of time. Okay, so the third analogy is the forest, and I'm a bit obsessed with this analogy, so apologies everyone if you've heard it from me before. But this analogy is really taking some of the research that shows that trees connect with each other through the mycorrhizal network underground. And through this mycorrhizal network, not only do they communicate with each other, but they also share sugars, and they do this across species. And this is a way that trees are able to survive when you've got a really dense forest, because obviously if we think about it, some trees are kind of much taller, their leaves are right up at the canopy, and so this is the way that the forest works. So in this analogy, I encourage the communities that I'm working with to think about the contributions that other people have made to them and the future that they want to kind of create. I always start with what contributions other people have made because I think that people find it easier. But yeah, to identify that they're not alone in wanting this future. They're not alone. And then I get them to think about what are the contributions they have made to others. And this is really a way of trying to reshape communities' collective identity from those dominant narratives of capitalism and neoliberalism, where we're really forced to think about ourselves as individuals and consumers, to try to shift that a little bit and to go, not only can we be change makers, but this community has been change makers. We have made change in the past. And by trying to bring that identity in, it sort of changes the lens of how people think about themselves in this community. So that's my third analogy. And then the last analogy is the campfire. And this analogy is really asking us to think about how we share our futures, how we write our futures, and how we share our futures. So the first thing I sort of talk to people about is backcasting versus forecasting. So I'm sure most of you know, but just in case you don't, for anyone on the video who's listening, forecasting is where we stand in the present and we think, oh, given what we know about the past, what will the future be like? Backcasting is where we jump to the future, to this beautiful future that we want. And then we look back and we think, okay, what are the big turning points that need to happen for us to get here? And then the question in the present becomes, what work do we do to get towards those turning points? I find this works can work a lot better because sometimes the leap from going from the present to this imagined future is too big, and people it's really easy to be cynical and go, it's not going to happen. So I ask participants to do that. And then this analogy also really gets us to focus on how do we share these futures, and can we do so in a bit of a ceremonial way. What I love about a campfire, that I'm sure everyone knows about campfires, is that somehow you're different in front of a fire with people. I don't know what it is, but we just are. I think you've got this focal point where you can all look at. You're not kind of looking at each other and engaging a ping pong of dialogue. We can kind of look at the fire, and we often tell stories around a campfire where we allow people the time and the space to tell a story in its entirety, and we sit and we listen, and then we sort of reflect on how it feels with us. And this is really what I'm trying to get through in this analogy, is sharing our future in this way with other people, and hopefully decision makers as well. But in this way where we're encouraging people to listen to the whole future and then reflect back on the bits that sort of resonate, rather than kind of falling into those cynical, this can't happen because people are greedy, that kind of idea. Um, and I often get people to make art and to make tactile things. Um, I think this is really important because I think we process information in really different ways. We have analytical brain, but then we also have this experiential brain. And I think when you're using both parts, that's where magic happens, where there's this sort of dance between abstract thinking and concrete making, or analytical thinking and experiential processing. That's when we not only think, I think not only does it help our thinking and make it clearer and more coherent, but I think it also helps us take it in and have it sit in our bodies, which means we're more likely to do something with this. Um, we also have the other case for it is that we have a bias called the Beta-Meinhof phenomenon, or the frequency illusion, which is this idea that things that are kind of top of mind, we will see out into the world. And I like to think that if we're doing these futures and we're making them really, really tangible, we're putting a lot of ideas in them. When people will leave, they'll start to see the seeds of those futures out in the world, and then they can do something. My other case is also that there's a really big power in witnessing other people's reaction to your preferred future, like your future that your community have come up with. That obviously those people get an advantage, they get to hear your future. But when you see other people going, yeah, no, I want that future too, it does something, it makes it more real. When we had the Museum of Futures exhibition at Parliament, it was the most powerful thing that I've seen. It really surprised me was people going around and going, yes, yes, yes. Like they saw connections in these futures that community wanted, and they loved it. Like they were like, I want this too. And so I think there's a really big benefit in not having futures be locked up in a report that no one's going to read, by putting it into something that's really accessible. Okay, and I'm pretty good for time. Excellent. So yeah, here's an overview. So we've talked about the telescope, the constellations, the forest to focus our attention on connection, and the campfire. And yeah, these together are kind of my sort of analogy and workshop that you can really use, I hope, in anything from a conversation to a big workshop. And I should also add, there is an origami version. And if you would like, I can send it to you. But yeah, so I sort of wanted to present this as something that would be fun and experiential. And so yeah, so if you want to do this kind of thing alone, you can do it as an origami exercise. So anyway, I think that's it for me. Here's my email address if anyone wants to email me. And yeah, hopefully I'll like to have some questions.
Thanks so much, Claire. Yeah, we had a little bit longer. Um, we have like 10 minutes. So we could potentially have some questions. One idea might be to have some questions in the chat, and then Claire can kind of talk to some sort of themes that emerge. That may be one way. Does anyone have any questions? What do you guys think about that? Or Claire, any other ideas for the 10 minutes that we have?
I don't mind, whatever. Feel free to ask, or feel free to put him in the chat.
Claire, I had a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
With in future, you have the three horizon when you talk about the past, the transition, and the future. Is there ways where we can sort of draw on that transition to bring the future we want, but also the...
Yes, yes. So I didn't include this, and I haven't written this up, and this is not really robust, but my general thinking on the 3 horizons method is that so when it comes to dominant narratives, there's and that transition between the two, there's an interesting term that I love, which is called bridging discourses. So it's sort of this idea of, if we have a dominant, say, okay, so say for example, we have a dominant narrative around autonomous cars, right? And Teslas, and like, you know, we're all going to be in our individual autonomous cars.
Yeah.
But the regenerative future is not really that everyone has autonomous cars. The future is that we use public transport. So what is the bridging discourse point? So we did one exhibition in Museum of Futures, which was called Cavies, and it was communal autonomous vehicles. And they were themed, had different sponsors, and you know, and this idea that, you know, you can have autonomous cars, but they could be communally owned. So yeah, how can you bridge two narratives with together? How do we implement this concept in everyday life or in the workplace? Yeah, okay, great question. Is it Izu? What a great name. I hope I said that right. Look, what I think the biggest thing to take away from this is that thinking about the future is really, really hard because we don't know what it's going to be, and our human brains are really bad at holding all of this uncertainty. So quite naturally, we just grab things that are out there, you know, whether it's a show or Netflix or an article that we've seen, and we kind of cobble these things together and they form our image of the future. And what I just would always really encourage anyone to do is to try to examine that image of the future and to just be like, okay, so this might be what we think happens, but what do we want to have happen, and to focus on that. So I think for me, even explaining episodic futures thinking and mental contrasting can be a really great help in getting people over this, but I think I know the futures. Think about collaboration versus control. Oh my gosh, that is a really difficult question. Practically, I like to take people to my garden and show them my garden, because the trees in my garden wouldn't survive without all of the other plants. So this whole idea of, like, you know, being in competition is kind of nuts. You know, they're all healthy because each provides different function, takes different nutrients out of the soil, puts different nutrients in, and that's how an ecosystem works. And so why would we not want to replicate an ecosystem? Cash. Yes, I do run workshops and do corporates and stuff. Are there any actions or outcomes both by corporates and to change their approach? I mean, I think for corporates and organizations, talking about the idea of regeneration and the value of regeneration is really powerful. It's like a shift of frame. I think it sometimes gives them, allows them to go, oh, okay. And I often use an example if I'm talking to a corporate, like, do you care about the quarterly profits or do you care about the next 100 years? Because that's the only question that we have here. Because if quarterly profits matter more, then don't bother engaging in futures thinking. And if 100 years matters, then you have to be regenerative, because you can't just keep extracting out of something and not put anything back. So that's really how I go in and frame most of this. I mostly don't talk about capitalism if I'm doing this with a corporate or an organization. I just firmly plant it in the beauty of regeneration. Nick, do you have a question?
Yep, thanks, Claire. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation. I love your energy. My question is, one of the things that preoccupies me a lot, and I guess it's reflective of my age, and you can see I don't have much hair, and what is there is very grey, is how we impart hope into the next generation. So what I wanted to ask you is whether the workshop approaches that you've developed can be adapted for a bunch of 10-year-olds or 14-year-olds, because I suspect that they would really embrace the thinking, which is, well, what sort of future do I want to imagine and be a part of as a 14-year-old?
Yeah. And I love this question, and I do get it a lot. And the answer is yes. Yes, absolutely. And the biggest thing I think about, what I found in my research, is this fact that dominant narratives shape so much of what we think. And the dominant narratives that are out there are about us not having agency, right? They are all geared on us not having agency and feeling fear and feeling despair and being able to deal with those feelings by buying things, right? That's how the great capitalist monster kind of works. As soon as you start saying that these are just dominant narratives, they're just stories, they're not the whole truth, I think it gives people this opportunity to be like, what? Oh, what? And then I just always pull out that beautiful Margaret Mead quote, never doubt the effectiveness of a thoughtful group of citizens to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. Sorry, I'm probably getting that wrong. But to remind people that, and kids as well, I think that, even if a change is enacted by government, it probably did not start there, let's be fair. It started with a group of community members who care about something, beating a drum until someone listened, and it set off a chain reaction. So I think that's the first bit. The other bit on if you're talking to young people who are losing hope is, I just always mention, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We just don't know. We can have all the IPCC and climate data that we've got, and we should all read that, we should all know that, but we also just can't know, because we can look back at the past and be surprised by the social revolutions and the social innovation that's taken place in really short spaces of time. So I know it can be difficult and to go into that space, but yeah, I always remind them of that. Okay. Oh, okay, thank you. Oh yes. I do have a centrifugal garden, yes. I love it. If anyone would like a whole Zoom 1 hour about the garden, it's my other very favorite topic of conversation. Does anyone have any more questions? Oh, Penelope, that would be so nice. Also, if any of this is interesting to you, please reach out. I'm really happy to share. I'm really happy to give any resources. If anyone's keen, a Museum of Futures, also keen to share that. So yeah.
Awesome. So I'm hoping let's give Claire some jazz hands, like claps, jazz hands. Woohoo! Thank you so much. So this is recorded. So if you want to on-share this to anyone else, I'll follow up with an email. And Claire, if there's anything you'd like me to add to the email, any links or resources or anything like that, I'm very happy to do that, and that will go out to all the people that registered who also who aren't here as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Claire, and yeah, just wishing everyone a beautiful day, and thank you for coming. Like, a lot of people watch this by video, but it's so great to have questions and faces in the room. So thank you all so much for coming. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Claire.
you. Bye.